Hello, everyone. This is Sherry Greenhouse, Managing Partner of Serum Exchange, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webcast. Can you hear me now? Start listening to your customer's whole call, presented by AVOKE Analytics. This webcast is being recorded. We'll make sure we send you a link where you can listen to this event again and share it with others in your organization, and there's some great information, some fun clips you're going to hear. You're going to want to pass this one on. And we'll make sure that at the end of the presentation, a survey will pop up. You're probably also going to want the slides. The way to get these slides is to, on the survey, place a check next to the question that asks if you'd like a copy of the slides. We will have a Q&A at the end of this presentation. Look over at your console. Q&A is in the lower right-hand side. That's where you want to put all of your questions. If you find you have any technical issues, either with the sound, if you're listening on streaming, or you can't see the slides, that's when you want to use chat, and you want to select WebEx Producer from the Send To, and your WebEx Producer will help you right away. I'd like to introduce your presenter for today, Joe Alwyn, VP and GM of AVOKE Analytics at Raytheon BBN Technologies. Based on 30 years of research and practice, companies select AVOKE Analytics to optimize customer effort, revenue, and cost efficiency. Joe was previously VP GM of Call Center Solutions at Empirics, has 25 years of experience turning technology innovation into practical business solutions, and each time in the surveys when Joe speaks at these webinars gets the highest results. So you're going to love his presentation. I'd like to introduce you now to Joe Alwyn.
Sherry, thank you very much. Gosh, such pressure. Such a nice introduction. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining us this afternoon for the next hour or so. We'll try to get through the material in 30 or 40 minutes, maybe 40, and leave some time for some questions. So make sure and jot down your questions as you're going through the presentation and put them in the Q&A panel as Sherry described, and we'll certainly get to as many of those as we possibly can. So what are we going to talk about today? Listening to the customer's whole call. What does that mean? Well, fundamentally, we're going to talk about the concept that though we have feedback programs and though we have recording systems and quality systems, in most organizations, that actually doesn't mean that we're always actively listening to feedback when customers are giving it to us. And so we're going to step through some examples where customers are talking to us as providers of various products and services, and even though we have all these systems in place, it's feedback that's just fallen on deaf ears or not being captured, not being utilized. And so we'll step through some examples of that, and we'll discover the kinds of insights that we're missing by not listening when the customer is in fact talking to us. In the title of the session today, it said it mentioned listening to the whole call, and so we are focusing on voice interactions, and I might add a few comments about that. The reason for focusing on voice interactions is a couple. First of all, it's just such a rich medium. When people are talking, you learn so much more than when they're communicating in your other communication channels. It's really it is all of most of the expense, and most customer service operations. Voice is still 70+% of the budget. So if we're looking for efficiencies, if we're looking to reduce the cost of service delivery for customer service, voice is where all the money is spent, so that's the place to find cost savings. And increasingly today, people are turning to voice as the second contact. They've tried the mobile app, they've tried the website, they've tried your other channels, and so the call is even more vital from the standpoint of the brand experience and our ability to retain and engage and keep customers as loyal customers and advocates. So let's jump in now, because we're going to use real examples of customer interactions, and these are examples where though this stuff happened and it's real and it's from actual customer interactions, these are the kinds of feedback, the kind of things customers are speaking that the companies they were calling were not listening to, did not hear. So as you hear these clips, think about, if this was happening in your contact center, do you have the systems, the processes, the technologies in place to actually capture this kind of feedback and do anything about it? All right, so let's go to the first one then.
for account balance. How may I help you?
Do I owe you any money?
Please hold while I transfer your call.
Oh, my God almighty.
Okay, that was the first one. Pretty animated response from the customer, and that was in the IVR. So not sure if, we all have systems to actually capture that very interesting feedback. Let's go to another one.
How may I help you?
Balance and recent payments.
Sorry, I didn't get that.
Para español, oprima el 1.
Account balance and recent payments.
Say things like account balance,
Account balance.
or is out, or
Account balance.
how may I help you?
Account balance.
Account balance and recent payments?
Okay, and in this set, let's go to one more, and then we'll talk about some of the common threads through this particular group.
The phone number you entered was invalid. Please enter your area code.
Oh, my God, are you serious?
Okay, those are actual experiences. These are customers reacting all in the IVR. So this is a piece of the phone call, a piece of the interaction where the customers are giving us some very specific feedback. And in most organizations, this information is completely lost. Essentially we heard people trying to pay a bill, begging to find out whether they owe any money. We heard folks really frustrated with the interaction with the automated system. And in most cases, in the examples of this particular, these calls, and maybe in your organization, there aren't systems to capture this. Because what we typically have in the IVR is what? We have application log data. And the log data says the caller was at this menu, and then they were at this menu. But what you just heard is not little log events of the caller's path through the IVR. They are emotional, vivid, very specific feedback about how we are choosing to interact with that customer when they're trying to reach us. And so, so what's the consequence of this? You might say, okay, fine. So people are not having a good time in the IVR. Is that really a big issue? Well, from a brand experience standpoint, it's certainly a big issue, right? Because this is your front door. This is your first impression. And of course, it also is, these sort of interactions are clearly indicating that you're missing opportunities to self-service, which means that calls are going to agents that possibly didn't have to. So we could have actually contained these calls and serviced the customer perhaps more quickly and at a lower cost by making them self-service calls. And if you think about the emotional tone that was in those customers' voices, so have we done the agents any favors if we put the customer in that highly charged state of mind before we give that customer to the agent? I mean, our agents have a ton of work to do. We don't need the IVR to essentially dig a hole for the agent and have the agent have to start at a deficit where a customer is so wound up that they're not going to be cooperative, they're likely to be combative, it's likely to extend handle time, it's likely to make it harder to actually control the dialogue and manage the call. So these are, this is pretty valuable feedback about how customers feel, about how the channels are working for them, and about, how the process is working, what kind of effort it is for customers to interact with us. So this is the first place where we have this issue of customers giving us feedback, and yet, and yet we're not listening, right? Can we hear them now? So let's go to a second set. There's actually 4 sets we're going to go through today. So let's go ahead and check out the next one and see where these are. We're out of the IVR now, so we're going to be looking at a different part of the call.
It sounds like I need to make sure that I get to the website by the end of the day today in order to stop that automatic payment.
You want to do that before noontime? At 1 o'clock, the system goes down, and it's not a guarantee, but it's not.
All right, so this isn't obviously we're starting to have a difficulty here. I'm sorry.
We're sorry, your call was unable to be completed. Please hang up and dial the toll-free number again.
Now, that one was interesting. So if you were keeping notes as that call progressed, there were a couple things that sort of caught me by attention. First of all, the agent actually interrupted and cut off the customer as they were talking. That's kind of unfortunate behavior. And, of course, in more quality systems, if that call got selected for scoring, hopefully your quality team would have caught that, and that would have been reflected in the score and would have turned into some coaching for that agent. But the end of that call is the part that's really interesting. The caller is talking, and the call is then interrupted with a message, an error message, saying your call could not be completed. So that's fascinating, because if you think about what was happening to the call somehow abruptly left the agent. And if it left the agent, that means your recording stopped. And so your quality analyst listened to that call and said, very strange that that call ended abruptly. What your quality analyst did not hear is that after that, there was an error message played saying your call could not be completed. So this is one where the listening systems we have in place would have caught one item, which is the agent sort of interrupting the call, cutting off the customer as they're speaking, and would have completely missed and miscategorized what happened at the end of the call. Most quality analysts would have listened to an abrupt end and would have said, well, the caller must have been on a cell phone and lost the connection. But if we were listening until the very end of the call, we would have in fact heard that that did not happen. We would have heard that either our switch or our telecom provider, the company that provides us the toll-free services, somehow mishandled that call and played your call could not be completed message, interrupting the customer as they were trying to resolve their issue. A very, very odd situation, one that, again, would be completely missed by listening systems that most of us have in place. Let's go to the next one.
I need to talk to someone about my account.
Please hold while I transfer your call.
That's unfortunate. There's a call where, the IVR is going to think that everything worked fine. The IVR is going to say, I listened to the customer and I had the default route or something, and so the IVR is going to show a couple of log events, and then the call got transferred into queue. And as far as all the reporting says, that call actually went to queue. And, of course, we never listened to the queues. And the call never got to the agent, so an agent recording never happened. And yet this call got a busy signal, didn't make it from the IVR to the agent. Something broke, and, again, that's an experience that the customer suffered through, and yet nobody actually ever heard. Okay, let's go to the third one.
I know, but this is ridiculous. Holy up.
Okay, so nice classical music, nice choice of cue music, but clearly this person is talking while in queue, expressing a view about this company's service. What does she say? I don't know, but this is ridiculous. And so there's feedback about how the customer feels about that particular transaction, that particular interaction, completely missed because it's in queue. In fact, that's the theme through all of these. In all of this set of three, we were when you listen to things that happened when our recording systems, when our quality systems were not recording. It was after the IVR. It was before the agent picked up. It was things that got mishandled in the telecom infrastructure, or while the call is being held by the switch or being held by your telecom provider in a queue or in transition from one place to the next. And so there's a couple things about these examples, right? Certainly they are frustrating to the customer. These customers that, the first one, halfway through a conversation with the agent and suddenly get to, your call cannot be completed error message, that person has to call it over again and start the whole process over again. The second one, goes through the IVR, expecting to get to an agent, gets a busy signal, has to hang up the phone, try again. So what's the theme here? Effort. High effort, and we know effort is, something that's very related to customers' decisions, whether to stick with a provider or to leave and go somewhere else. And in the last case, most times in queue, there's not a lot going on. Customers are sort of listening to queue messages, listening to music. But customers do talk during the queue, and they sometimes tell us more than we might hear otherwise because they assume nobody's listening in the queue. And so if you're recording the whole call, and if you're using some speech analytics so you can, go right to those examples where people are talking in queue, you can learn something. In this case, this person's saying, this is ridiculous, right? Giving us some real feedback that particular interaction, that particular issue that she was resolving was, very unsatisfactory. Okay, we've got 2 more sets of fun clips to go through, so let's go to the next batch. Let me flip over to the right folder where I've got this next set of clips. Okay, so here's the first one.
So, Jan, how may I help you?
Oh, my God, these automated, they should dump them. They can't hear the words you're saying.
All right, and let's go to the second one, and then we'll talk about all 3 of them.
I can, and they will tell you if you're going to be compensated or not. I don't have an answer for you at this moment.
Who do I speak with? What exact department? Because I don't want to get this runaround that I get every time that I call this stupid number.
Okay, you can call the claims department.
All right, and then the third one.
So you'd actually want to report that payment to our credit department? Did you want their telephone number before I transferred you?
No, that's fine, thank you.
All right, let me get you right over there.
Okay, well, now those calls all sound like something we would hear in our quality systems, right? Those were all dialogues with an agent, and so, we would catch those. And I think the real question in these 3 examples is, are we listening for all of the things that are actually happening in those calls? In many cases, we have very highly calibrated, very carefully defined scorecards, and our quality teams are grading the calls, on those items. And perhaps not listening for all of the other content that is in that dialogue, in that interaction, and perhaps that we even have the tools to investigate a little further and find out what's going on, why did this happen. So in the first example, the woman says, oh my God, these automated systems, they should just get rid of them. So there you go. We've got some feedback in a dialogue with an agent. First of all, the problems in the IVR is wasting agent time because the customer feels that they must spend some talk seconds here complaining about the IVR. Fantastic. The IVR is stretching out handle time, right? Secondly, now, we have this bit of information that our quality analyst could have caught. Is there a vehicle in your program for quality to actually capture that and say, somebody needs to go look into this. We have IVR problems. Or is that sort of feedback sort of missed because it's not about evaluating the agent? The fact that the IVR, that people complained about the IVR doesn't show up anywhere in the evaluation of the agent, therefore is it lost business intelligence. And even if we were able to say, wait a minute, let's stop and figure out why in the world this person is complaining about the IVR, can we actually go back? Can we essentially rewind the call even before the agent got on the line? Can we listen to that caller's interaction on the IVR so we can understand why they felt compelled to complain about it to the agent? Because that experience in the IVR must have been terrible, such that the agent decided, the caller decided they had to complain to the agent about it. So what else did we hear in this? Well, we heard a person saying, oh my God, the runaround every time I call this number. So here's a customer giving us some business intelligence and feedback about the business processes we have. We may have processes that are justified or well, established for a long time that says if you have a call like this, you must transfer it there. And that second group has more rules that says further, if it's like this, you must transfer it again. So, this caller who complains about a runaround every time she calls, she may be transferred every time she calls for legitimate policy reasons. But who's looking at the combination of all those policies to say, wait a minute, those may have all been correct transfers, but oh my God, what that's putting our customers through. So here we have a situation where, in this call, we could be, again, listening for how that agent handled the call, but is anybody listening for why in the world, there's some process feedback here about how we handle this caller or her type of inquiry. Let's, can we step back and look at that from a bigger picture and learn something about the whole call? And then finally, the last example we listened to was a perfectly fine call. It sounded terrific. There was nothing wrong that I heard in that last clip, and there was a simple statement saying that I have to transfer you. But the problem is, in that one, we really don't know enough to say whether that was a correct transfer. It sounds fine. It sounds like the agent, if you listen to that whole call, it sounded like the agent did a good job of probing for the reason for call, identifying a transfer, announcing the transfer. The caller was fine with it. Sounds perfect, but you actually don't know until you follow that call to the second agent and find out whether how did the second agent handle the call. And did the second agent assert or discover that the issue was the same as what the first agent discovered? Based on what happened in the second call, in the second agent, does that in fact validate the transfer decision that the first agent made? So here's a case where, it can sound like the call was handled correctly, it can sound like a proper transfer, but we really don't have enough information to evaluate it. So that's that set. That's an interesting set because that set, those were a set of calls where we have the audio. It's in our quality system. Those are just agent dialogues. The question really is, are we listening for all the content that's in those interactions? And do we have an easy way to go understand that feedback and then do something about it in terms of creating, improvement strategies or improvement initiatives in the organization? Okay, so 3 more interesting examples of feedback that we might not be hearing. So let's jump into the first one here.
No, listen, I don't know who, someone just tried to transfer me from customer service. I'm being transferred all around, and they sent me back to the automated system instead of sending me to the credit department.
All right, let's listen to the second one now.
Just even more aggravating, the last person I spoke to before you, they were connecting me through to a supervisor without making me wait, and then they just brought me right back to the beginning of customer service again.
Okay, and then one more in this group.
Is this a house, condo, or apartment?
It's a house. Why am I telling you this? I just told this other woman this, and now you're asking the same questions. What's the purpose of this?
Okay. Now, here's an interesting group. This is kind of like the previous group in that these are dialogues with agents. So this would be in our quality system. We would actually hear this. And we have the basic problem we discussed earlier, which is even though that's in the recording, are we listening for it or are we just listening for, whether the agent conducted the call properly? Because really what's going on in all of these, this is a group where calls are, all 3 of those examples, where calls are being transferred around a lot, and maybe not only being transferred within centers that we operate. If we have business partners, right, we outsource calls to outsource centers, maybe offshore centers, or perhaps we have a product line that's provided by a partner. So when a call comes in for that product line, we transfer the call to an outside provider. This is very common in health insurance, right? In many health insurance organizations, durable medical equipment, things like crutches and breathing apparatus, are provided by a separate company, a DME provider. And when your health insurance provider gets a call about that, they transfer the call off to this other company. So the issue here then is, are we able to actually look at that entire experience and understand some of this feedback? In these clips we listened to, customers were complaining about being transferred around, being thrown back into the IVR. The last caller said, why am I having to repeat the same information over and over again? That call, for example, that feedback might be happening to the in the partner center. So this is another set of calls where we may not have this audio. If this audio we just listened to was happening in a partner center with a partner agent, we may have no access to that at all, right? Because the partner just gives us back some performance scores about how they're doing, and we may not be able to record or have access to the recordings of what our business partner is doing. Or even if we do have access to those recordings, or we hear an experience like this, can we stitch the whole thing back together to figure out why in the world was the customer feeling this way? And frequently that's not the case. So So now we're sort of done with these examples, and let's step back now then and talk about kind of what we've seen. What we've seen, I guess, is the quality or the call center or the company equivalent of selective hearing. I've got teenagers. I don't know what it is. They, sometimes I know they have selective hearing. I think this is actually documented as a biological behavior. Kids hear what they want to hear and don't hear other stuff. Well, in some sense, in customer service, sometimes we're like that too. When we're listening to calls and when we're establishing what our quality team is supposed to do, we're hearing what we want to hear. We want to hear whether the agent followed the script, followed policies. We want to hear whether this agent needs training and which training to send them to. We want to hear whether this agent needs coaching. We want to hear whether this agent honestly shouldn't be in customer service, right? Those are the things that we usually want to hear and we actively listen for, and we build scorecards and processes to manage all of those issues. The things we don't hear, and you can say are we choosing to ignore it, or do we not have the tools and processes in place for it? I guess it's mostly a combination of both, right? But the things we don't hear is, what do we put customers through in the IVR? And how does that either set up the agents for success or dig a hole for the agents to make it even harder for the agents to deal with the call? When a transfer happens, what processes do we really have to ensure that transfers go through? Instead of just telling every customer, let me give you a number to call in case the transfer fails, why don't we actually follow transfers and get to know the failure modes and go fix them so we don't have to spend a few seconds giving them a phone number in case the transfer fails. I mean, it's funny because whenever I'm in one of those situations and the agent says, let me give you a phone number in case the transfer fails, what I'm thinking is, don't you care enough to make sure the transfers are successful? Who's listening for that and finding those problems and getting them out of the system? Who's listening for what's happening in queue? Are our queue messages just pissing people off because we're telling them things that are obvious and they already know? Do we actually see customers that listen to a queue message and then say something to indicate they're enlightened and hang up the call as if the queue message actually self-serves the call? What's really going on in there? How many times do we make customers repeat information? Do we know? There's so much talk nowadays about customer effort and customer experience. But if we're not listening to all these parts of the call, we're really not in a position to assess effort or to assess experience. And when we get back to, the bottom line, what does this mean? We're missing opportunities to streamline the handling of calls, to reduce the total cost to deliver service. We're missing opportunities to reduce the total effort that the customer has to expend to interact with us. And we're missing opportunities to capture really valuable feedback about our products, our services, and our interaction processes. Maybe painted graphically, you can look at it this way, right? You could say that a call actually, from dialing to hang up, for many customers, starts with an interaction in the IVR, and then maybe a short queue, and then maybe a first agent. And then in some cases, customers have to be transferred, and they have to be transferred to a second agent. That's the whole call, right? The call isn't just the green part. And in most of our sort of listening systems, we think of calls as from the moment the agent picked up the call, the start of that green section, to when the agent released the call, the end of the green section. That's what we think the call is, and in fact it's not, as we've learned through these clips and through our discussion today. We basically, here's selective hearing painted another way, right? We ignore the rest of it, right? We just listen to this agent piece because that's our focus, is to decide whether the agent is doing a good job or not. And of course, this picture is even more complicated when we take pieces of this call and outsource it, right? If we have the IVR being provided by one company, maybe tier 1 by another outsourcer, and perhaps the only centers that we manage ourselves are the tier 2, the escalation centers. So the more partners we use in this, the more opportunities there are to have inefficient, frustrating, difficult experiences for our customers, and at the same time, the more opportunities there are to have a total cost of service delivery that's higher than it should be and higher than it needs to be. So what are we going to do about it? We sort of set up this problem, and I think in the description that you all read that encouraged you to join today, we said something that we would also talk about how you tackle this issue, and it's really you sort of shift analytics to a broader view. You kind of maybe it's the equivalent of stepping back and seeing the whole picture, right? So can we open up the lens of analytics to examine the call from dialing to hang up? And that actually has a lot of implications because the technology that we use for recording probably can't be the same stuff we've been using because traditionally recording systems are attached to a switch. And if we look at the whole call from start to finish, in very few cases do calls live on the same switch. They move around, and especially if you use any partners. So we have to think about where is the technology that actually captures this end-to-end experience, and are the kinds of analytics that are out there, a certain kind of speech analytics or whatever, is that technology adequate to really listen to these various pieces of the call? A lot of the analytics that have been built today have been designed to analyze the customer-agent interaction. Well, analyzing the customer IVR interaction is very different, and analyzing what happens in queue is very different. And some of the systems that have been built to analyze the agent-caller dialogue don't do such a great job when we try to apply that to the other pieces of the call. But there are analytic systems out there that actually are able to follow calls from true cradle to grave, from start to finish, from dialing to hang up, systems that can actually survive through transfers. Even if you use a network transfer or a take-back and transfer, there are solutions that can actually stay with the call and keep recording and not be interrupted by a transfer. Can actually stay with the call as it gets transferred to an outsourced center in the Philippines and then comes back to one of your centers in Tennessee or wherever it might be. And by having this ability to stick with the call, true cradle to grave, dialing to hang up, even if it goes to business partners, and then have the tools necessary to actually take apart all those different pieces of the call, that's really what a whole call analytics system brings to the solution. I guess not surprisingly, we have one of those, and my focus today was really to talk about the business application of this kind of technology, not to get into our specific product. But I do want to sort of just highlight a couple of things. The conclusion we came to a long time ago was you can't put this kind of a system at any particular call center, at any premise, at any specific data center, because calls move around too much. They rarely stay in one place. They get transferred around. They're handled by outsourced partners, internal organizations, business partners. And so we chose to build a solution that pushed up into the phone network, push it up into the cloud, take it away from the premise. And if you put it in the cloud, then you have the opportunity to stay with the call from start to finish, no matter where the call goes. In fact, you can change providers. You can be using one call center today and a completely different outsourced partner tomorrow, and your recording and analytics system is unaffected and has no changes. So there's some pretty nice opportunities that you get when you push this sort of solution up into the cloud. Of course, there's the usual benefits of a cloud solution, which is no software, no integration, and all that kind of thing. And then when you add into that the kind of analytics that are necessary to take apart IVR interactions, in addition to see what's happening in the queue, in addition to handling the agent caller dialogue kind of analytics, now you have the ability to take what happened in the entire call from start to finish, use that to categorize the calls into interesting buckets, and then give you the ability, or your analyst the ability, to go right to those really interesting calls, and then to go right to the really interesting locations within the really interesting calls, and that's what starts to give us some productivity in finding the nuggets of information in this massive amount of data we have, all of, huge number of recordings we might have. We replace sort of random sampling and a tedious, looking for the needle in the haystack kind of exercise with the ability to use analytics to go right to the stuff you want to find and have the actual audio of the cradle to grave experience to use as evidence to compel the organization to say, yes, we should go fix that. So not only can you find things more quickly, but you also have sort of compelling information to help the organization come to some improvement strategies. So, what does this really mean? We've been doing this with customers for a long time. This is a slide that Dell actually presented at a speech tech conference years ago to illustrate some of the value they got by using an end-to-end whole call analytics kind of solution. And it is significant. I mean, when you open up the lens and start looking at the whole call, you find ways to start chopping seconds off of average handle time, to start improving self-service, to start improving Net Promoter and customer effort scores. And we know all of those things, drive very compelling sort of ROI results for companies that make these kinds of investments. Okay. Well, that actually wraps up the presentation material, and would love to get into some questions and answers. And so I encourage you to, if you haven't yet, to put some questions and answers in some questions in the panel. We'll work on the answers. If you just put your questions in, that'd be great. You can put them in the Q&A section there on the in the WebEx panel that you're viewing. Also here we have contact information. You can reach me directly. You can see my information there on the right. And on the left, we've got all kinds of other contacts to get to the AVOKE Analytics team here at BBN. So with that, Sherry, maybe you've got a few questions, and we can jump in and handle a couple questions.
Yeah, we do. A couple of questions are queued up, and just as Joe mentioned, in the Q&A section, that's where you should put your questions. Okay. What metrics would you look at to gauge customer experience, and how do you go about defining those metrics?
Boy, metrics questions. We could do a whole another 1-hour session on metrics. So let me try and offer a few ideas. At a high level, metrics like customer satisfaction and customer effort and Net Promoter Score are certainly valuable. They can give you a sort of single number, which a lot of companies find easy to use and easy to share among leadership. And of those, I think we've observed in many cases that customer effort can be the one that is actually more predictive of repurchase behavior and loyalty. But all three of these metrics can have some advantage. The challenge with those metrics is finding actionable strategies to make improvements in the metric. They tend to be sort of lagging indicators, and they tend to lack the detail to kind of tell us quickly what to go do and make things better. And of course, if we take surveys and add many more questions so we can get the detail we want, then the response rate disappears, right? And then we don't get any responses to the survey. So there's limits to that kind of an approach. So the next place you can go for helpful customer experience metrics is to actually make measurements of the call. And we have some of those today, right? We have hands time and talk time and call duration and things of that nature. We can measure some metrics in the IVR, although that is widely varied. Some systems have great detailed metrics. Other systems have really horrible, antiquated measures like containment. So you could have those metrics. But with analytics now, you can do many other interesting things in terms of using technology to make objective, repeatable, consistent, data-oriented measurements about what happened in the interaction. So what do I mean by that? Well, software now, analytics, can identify calls where there was an expression of being frustrated or upset. We can identify whether the caller asked for a supervisor, and we can separate that from whether the agent said they were going to go get a supervisor. We can measure all kinds of metrics around the IVR experience with a lot more granularity than just containment. We can measure whether there were transfers. We can measure whether there were error messages, like some of the clips we heard today, where your call cannot be completed, busies. We can identify who hung up on who, and there's places where we expect the agent to hang up first. There's places where we expect the customer to hang up first. We never expect IVR to hang up on customers in most environments. So we actually have defined in a separate service we provide called the Customer Effort Index, 17 of these measurements that we make on every call and make that data available in our system, and we actually have a way to roll that up into a single index, so you can have a single figure of merit as well. So there's a variety of approaches. There's survey approaches. There's direct measurements of the call. I think we have found that that direct measurements of the call, the 17 metrics that our software does automatically, has some advantages because you get every call. There's no survey bias. You're not worried about a sample rate because you can measure every call. You're not worried that you're only getting surveys back from the people that are upset because the software measures every call. Since we measure every call, there's no lag time to get the responses back, and since you have the measurements tied to the calls, you can go right from the data immediately down to individual calls and really accelerate the time it takes to understand why you're getting the metrics you're getting and what you should do about it. So kind of a long answer, but like I said, customer experience metrics could be a whole separate 1-hour session.
Okay, great. Hey, that could be your next session.
Yeah.
Metrics. Let's see. Well, any company can benefit from analyzing the whole call. Do you see any one or two industries using this technology more than others?
Great question. At this point, it's becoming pretty widespread. I would say that, we've been at this for a while. In the beginning, we saw rapid uptake, and sort of the early industries that adopted this were consumer electronics, telecommunications, so people that provide cable TV, internet access, telephone service, and healthcare. But now we're seeing it expand to other sectors. And I think what we have discovered is that it's not necessarily vertical specific or industry specific. Where this has maximum value is where there are many skill groups, there are business partners involved, there may be multiple product lines, and there's a strategy to really try to get a lot of value out of the IVR. If you have no IVR and one skill group, then the whole call is just the one agent who takes the call, right? If we have no IVR, one skill group, and every agent is a universal agent, then we know what the whole call is. It's the time they spent with the agent. But as that model gets more complex, as we have, first we have to identify the product line. Then within the product line, we have to figure out if it's a customer service question, a technical support question, a billing question, or a new order question. So, the more you have to disambiguate calls, the more you have to get calls to a diverse set of specialists in order to handle the call, the more important this sort of technology is. The more you use outsourced providers, because the problem with outsourced providers is that you lose some governance, you lose some visibility when the call goes to a partner and their systems and their infrastructure and their site. And a whole call analytics system can kind of be like mystery shopping. It allows you to essentially peer into how your partners are handling your calls without them having any control, say, about it, without asking them to do anything to their systems. You just essentially gives you the ability to follow your customers as they're handled by your business partners on your behalf. It gives you really an unprecedented opportunity to make sure that your business partners are withholding the brand and delivering a service experience that's consistent with how you want your customers to be handled. So again, it's really complexity of the environment that makes a whole call solution really compelling.
Let's see here. We have a question about recording licenses. So you had an example of following the whole call and utilizing the cloud. And this person is missing transfers from the agent to agents because they were told they needed that second license to capture the transfer. Do you have any comments on this with recording licenses? Is that something you're aware of?
Well, this is unique to different vendors, and different vendors have different pricing strategies. That sounds like a pricing strategy and a product structure that's sort of, tied to the old premise-based model. You put a system at this center, and you have a license for every agent at that center. And if the call is going to go to another center, well, you got to put another system in the other center, and you got to have a license for each of those agents. And so, systems that were designed with the idea that the purpose of the system is to evaluate the agent to a scorecard, they license per agent, because that's what the system was built to do. There's new generations of product that don't license that way. So I think you could find that there are solutions out there that don't really force you to incur that kind of a cost. I mean, and I'll just tell you from our standpoint, from the AVOKE Analytics Group, the important unit for us is a call. And the call is not defined by the number of agents. The call is defined by the customer. Customer placed a call, and that call, started and had a certain total duration, and it was handled by some IVRs and some agents. But for the customer, it was a call. And so, we look at it from the customer standpoint, and we don't basically, it wasn't the customer's choice to have their call handled by two agents. They had one question, they picked up the phone to call you, and so the customer's experience from cradle to grave as a call. That's kind of the way we look at it, but we know that, not every vendor looks at it that way.
Here's a good question. What's some of the best ways to build a business case for this type of technology?
Yeah. So the examples we went through today, the clips we listened to, there were three really different kinds of things we saw. And I would say one of them is very operational and easily translates into an ROI. The other two are a little more strategic, and it's a little trickier to build the ROI around them. So let's do the easy one first. A lot of folks were telling us in those clips that they were frustrated with how we were using their time. We were making them repeat information over and over and over again. Once to the first agent, again to the second agent, and by the way, I also provided the information in the IVR. So that's great feedback. And if we take some time and look at that, there are very proven ways to take the information that was gathered in the IVR, give it to the first agent, and pass any information that the first agent got on to the second agent. These aren't hard things to do. Technology's out there. They're very easy to do. And in a whole call situation like this, it's simple to tally up all the time savings from doing that and turn that into hard dollar savings. There was other feedback that we heard in the clips that gave us some clues about how we can improve IVR self-service. Again, really easy to calculate hard dollar savings by increasing self-service. There was feedback we heard about, why are calls transferred around so much. If we studied what kind of calls we transfer using a whole call analytics solution, we might say, wait a minute, for this call type, that could be handled by the first agent. We could change the policy. We can provide another tool to the first agent and take an entire class of transfers out of our operation. Very easy to do a hard dollar ROI on some of those things. So, and what we can bring, and others can too, we can bring you, experience with other companies in, how many of those kind of things are you likely to find? What is it likely to mean? In our experience, it's really, it's not aggressive to say that we're going to find an opportunity to save 10 to 15% of total agent talk time, total number of agent seats, total number of scheduled agent labor, by using this sort of technology to find things that we don't hear right now, to find stuff that we're not listening for currently that could translate into streamlined service delivery processes and 10 to 15% savings. So that's the hard dollar one. The other two things that can go into the ROI are, the customer's feedback on customer effort. Right, we can pick out things that are contributing to low customer stat scores, low net promoter scores, high customer effort scores, and we can move the needle on those scores. Okay, but does that translate into more sales? Well, that's where the ROI gets a little trickier, but certainly for many companies, improving satisfaction, reducing effort, increasing net promoter can justify investment. And then the last area that we heard was feedback on products and services. Can we learn how to make our product better? Can we learn how to make the service we provide better? And that's a strategic benefit as well. If we added a feature to the product, are we going to sell more? Are we going to reduce our expenses? A little trickier ROI, but in our experience, the operational savings are so compelling and so easy to calculate that it makes the purchase justification pretty straightforward.
Good. Let's see. Here's another question here. You said AVOKE Analytics doesn't require software or integration. I can't follow how this works. Do we send you a bunch of call recordings and data?
Okay, good question. And some folks do that. They make you back up all your recordings and transfer them, and then they have to ingest these recordings and figure out if they're in a format they can use, and that's a lot of complexity. We don't do any of that. So we built a system where we work with your telecom team to make a small change to the way calls are delivered to your call center. And instead of calls coming straight to your call center, they actually run through my data center before they hit your call center. And that is done with a couple of very simple orders with your provider of toll-free services. And now we are, one phrase for it is we're a man in the middle, right? We're standing there in between your customer and you. And since we're in the path, we're in the middle of that conversation, we can hear everything that's going on, we can record everything that goes on, and then we can use our analytics to extract data from those recordings, categorize the calls, and give you all the reports. So it's a recording system that we host in our data center, and by placing a couple of orders with your toll-free provider, the path that calls take to get to your center changes. Those calls make a little detour through my data center and then land in your call center. And that's how it's done. It's really quite simple. Those two orders take, depending on who your toll-free provider is, take 2, 3, 4 weeks to implement and test, and then we're in production. So it's a pretty straightforward thing to do. And you don't have to have recording systems. I don't want your recordings. You don't have to send audio files to me. It's just a simple system to put in.
As a follow-up question to that, what is the lag time when routing a call through your data center?
Yeah, great question. There is a slight additional delay in establishing the call. So it tends to be somewhere in the 300, 400, 500, maybe 600 milliseconds. So most customers, when they give you a call, if it takes an extra half a second before the phone starts ringing, they're probably, that's imperceptible to most callers. So that's it. It takes just, everything, for those of you that are telecom folks that are listening today and joining us this afternoon, everything is done digitally. So, the customer only hears one ring, which is when it's actually hitting your call center. The path through our servers is silent and again, adds on the order of a half a second, 300, 600, 700 milliseconds before the caller hears the first ring. That's it. Everything else with no delay, no other introduction of any changes to the audio quality or the customer's experience.
Okay. Let's see. That appears to be all the questions that we have. So if you can take maybe 30 seconds and let's do a wrap-up of the most important item everybody should remember.
Well, I think the most important thing is to realize that a call is defined by your customer, not by your agent. And to the customer, the call starts when they start dialing your phone number, and it ends when they hang up the call. And cradle to grave, true start to finish, that is the call. That is the total cost of service delivery to provide that service to your customer. It's the total customer effort, and if we're not looking at calls that way, we're really not aligned with our customer in thinking about what that experience was like, and we're also not aligned with the total cost of service delivery. And so the most important thing is to realize that if we're going to take customer experience seriously, we have to do take a step back so we have a wider view, open up the lens, and realize the call begins way before it gets to the agent. The call starts before it gets to the agent, right? And the call, in many cases, continues after the agent transfers the call or agent releases the call. So, for customer experience, for total service delivery cost, we've got to open up the lens, and we've got to start looking at cradle-to-grave service delivery processes. How do we get visibility? How do we benefit from the customer feedback that occurs in that entire experience and use that to really drive world-class customer service?
Perfect. Thank you. And that brings us to the conclusion of this webcast. It will be available within 24 hours as a recording. You do not need to do anything. We will automatically send you the recording link. If you do want a copy of the slides, please check on the survey that you would like those slides sent to you. So thank you very much to Joe Alwyn at AVOKE Analytics for bringing us this this webinar and the fun clips that we listen to. And thank you to everyone in the audience today. We appreciate when you come and you spend an hour with us on the afternoons. Thank you all. And at this point, we will be closing this webcast. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Sherry. Thank you, everybody.